Good evening. Welcome to part 19 of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. Athens versus Jerusalem. The sages of Athens debate a rabbi about spirituality, truth, and philosophy. I want to thank tonight's sponsor for dedicating tonight's class in memory of Bubbe, my grandmother, whose yahrzeit was yesterday, my daughter's namesake. Her name was Yehudit, Bat Harav Nochum Zalman Z. May her neshama have an aliyah and be a source. She is a source of great blessing to her family and for us all. And if you want to sponsor a class and dedicate a class, there's a link below, and we would greatly appreciate that. You can download the source sheet for tonight in the link there on your screen. We're studying from the Talmud Tractate Bechorot, page 8b. So we're exploring a little bit about the great debate historically that began millennium ago, but it continues till today, which is the debate of Athens versus Jerusalem, because really a lot of the world today, many cultures and societies today, are influenced by these two great nations, these two great cultures, great religions. And we find in the Talmud quite a few places, quite a number of episodes of discourse and relationship between rabbinic Jewish sages and the leaders of Athens, of Greek of the time. And we're going to discover one of those conversations today. And what do we know about Athens versus Jerusalem? Of course, we all know about the great story, the great miracle, the festival of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah commemorates a clash of these two forces and societies in a very violent way. Eventually it came down to a war because of great hostility and persecution by the Greeks to the Jewish people. And so on Hanukkah, we celebrate the heroism of the few Jews, the Maccabees, who overcame and redeemed and saved Jerusalem and Israel from the hands of the Greeks, and once again restored Jewish sovereignty into the land of Israel. But this tension between the Greeks and the Jews wasn't just about, a military force of control over land. It became that as well. But on a deeper level, it was really a clash between cultures. So what did the Greeks believe in, and what did the Jews believe in? Well, the Jews certainly believed in God, and God is a creator of the world. And so therefore, the world as we see it is not the be-all and end-all of reality. It's only a part of, it's the created reality. But there are forces, creative forces, and existence that predates the physical creation, which is godliness. Versus the Greeks, who believed generally in the eternality of all matter, and everything that has existed forever and somehow came into existence. And they didn't believe in an other worldly force or spirit of God, but they believed in the absolute beauty and truth of existence of our world as we know it. So the great German Jewish philosopher of the 19th century, Heinrich Heine, he said the difference between the Greeks and the Jews is that the Greeks consider beauty to be truth, and the Jews consider truth to be beauty. And as the 20th century philosopher William Barrett wrote, that while the Greeks idealized philosophic speculation and theoretical meditation, the Hebrews emphasized moral and ethical conduct in daily human behavior as being the highest good. In other words, it could be summarized: what stood at the center of your universe? What stood at the center of reality? From the Jewish perspective, it was God as the truth that stood at the center of everything, and everything around it, to all of existence and all of life and all of matter, was created by, and therefore the forces are being run by, the God entity, the Godhead. For the Greeks, it was man that stood at the center of reality. As the great Greek Pythagoras said, it's man who stands at the center of all things. And so we find that even when the Greeks did create their gods, their pagan gods, their gods were created by them. And they created their gods to look like them, truthfully. All the gods on Mount Olympus were in human form and shape, beautiful human form and shape, right? The most beautiful they could sculpture, because for them that was the ultimate of beauty. Whereas for the Jews, it was the other way around. We don't sculpt God in the image of man, but man is created in the image of God. We know that the two sons of Noah, he had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So Ham is cursed, and Ham ends up being the slave nation of the world. We read about this in the Torah a few weeks ago. But Shem and Japheth are the fathers of two great cultures and movements in life. So Shem becomes the father of the Semites, including the Jewish people, and Japheth eventually becomes the father of the Greeks and the Hellenists. Japheth, the word Japheth means Yafet. It means beautiful. And so it's a culture that admires beauty, but the beauty of the human, the beauty of the mind, the beauty of human achievement, the beauty of our world. And so they create all kinds of beautiful arts and sciences, science, drama, literature, poetry, philosophy, the human body, the exercise, the sports, the Olympics, all trying to make the most of the created reality, or to them was the reality. Versus Shem, the Semites, believed in something much more than that, much higher than that. There was an otherworldly existence as well. So the word Shem also comes from the Hebrew word Sham, which means there, meaning as much as we have our world here, and that's all we can actually see, but there is Sham. There is something else other than our world. There's the forces which created our world. There's that which existed before our world came into existence, into being, and that is God. So we have a very big debate about between these two cultures, which affected a lot of life. Now, during the Hanukkah story, it was the attraction of the Greek culture and philosophy and ideology, which was attracting many Jewish people as well. So we call them the Hellenized Jews. And so there became friction in the Jewish community, not only against the Greeks who were outlawing a lot of the Torah, but a lot of the Jewish people as well were becoming attracted to that. And we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, the main character of our story tonight is a great sage, a rabbi. His name is Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania. I think we've spoken about him before. He's a great sage in the 1st, 2nd century, one of the prize students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great leader at the time before the temple was destroyed, when the temple was destroyed, and rebuilt Jewish life after the destruction of the temple. So much so that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said about this student, he said, Ashrei Yoladato. Happy is the one who gave birth to him. And that was more of a praise for his mother, because as soon as he was born, he was a young baby for the first years of his life, even though he couldn't talk but his mother always took him to the synagogue in his cradle to make sure that he would hear the prayers and the songs and the melodies, and he would hear the music, and he would hear the teachings being studied in the study halls. And that's the way he grew up. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania, he was also a Levi. So in the temple, for the first years of his life, he was part of the Levi tribe who would sing and play instruments, accompanying the sacrifices and the worship in the temple. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania is a very wise person. He's very sharp. He's very well-versed, not just in Jewish knowledge and literature, but also in other fields of wisdom as well. So he became a very powerful spokesperson for the Jewish people because of his oratory skills and his vast knowledge. And we know that he traveled a lot. We know that he traveled to Rome. The Roman emperor he had a close relationship with him, and it said about him that the Roman emperor at the time called Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanania a glorious mind. He traveled to Alexandria. He had relationships there with the leadership in Egypt, and he also traveled to Athens because he had a lot of communication with Caesar and other great leaders about science and scripture and Judaism and philosophy and many other things. So this is a very, very talented scholar and sage. And tonight we're going to learn about an encounter that he had with the 60 elders of Athens as he traveled there to have a great debate about a number of ideas ultimately between Judaism, Jewish thought, and Jewish philosophy versus the Greek culture and philosophy. So I hope you have downloaded the source sheet where it's starting from Talmud Becharot, page 8b. It's a beautiful story. Now, a lot of what we're going to read in the beginning is actually an introduction to the main part of the story, but I want to include the introduction because the buildup of how we get to the actual debate is fascinating as well. In the debates, there's actually about, the Talmud goes on pages and pages, maybe about 10, 11 or more questions that they debate about. We're not going to study all of them tonight. Maybe in the future we'll have a chance to study more because each one is more cryptic and fascinating than the next. But we're going to study 2 or 3 tonight that I've selected, and we'll see where we go from here. Let's begin our story. The Roman emperor said to Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani, in the case of a snake, after how long of a period of gestation does a snake give birth? So previously in the Talmud, they're discussing about the length of gestation for all different kinds of animals and birds. Why they're discussing that is not relevant for right now, but it just is amazing how the extent and the depth of the wisdom and the curiosity of our sages to explore every aspect of this world. So they had wisdom about everything, which very often that equipped them to make rulings about different matters in Jewish law in very comprehensive and knowledgeable ways. So we're talking about the snake. So the Talmud had already told us that the snake was cursed. You remember the first snake who seduced Chava to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and then Adam ate from it as well. So the snake was punished. He was punished that his legs were cut off. He had to crawl on the ground. He was also punished that his gestation would be one of the longest for all animals. It would take 7 years to give birth. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani tells the Roman emperor, after 7 years, that's the answer. The emperor said to him, but the elders of the school of Athens bred snakes, and they gave birth after 3 years. In Athens, we are told in the books, in all the science books that they have in Athens, based on their experiments and snake breeding, they know it takes only 3 years of gestation. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani responded, those snakes were already pregnant from beforehand, from before 4 years. So you think that the conception is starting and you counted 3 years, but from 4 years before then, the snake was already pregnant. The emperor asked, but they engage in intercourse? And the assumption is that animals, once a female is pregnant, she won't engage in relations whilst she is pregnant. So therefore, up until those 4 years, if they were having intimacy, so they weren't pregnant. So Rabbi Yeshua responds, snakes also engage in intercourse like people. So there's something similar between snakes and humans, that even if the female is pregnant, she'll still have relations. So therefore, for 4 years, they're already pregnant. So it takes 7 years for gestation for a snake. Emperor says to Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani, but how can you disagree with the sages of Athens? Aren't they wise? They know what they're talking about. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani responded, indeed, they might be wise, but we are wiser than they. These people are already getting a glimpse into the difference of thinking over here. The Athens, the Greek philosophers who studied everything based on their knowledge of science and using all the data of this world to come up with the most profound and advanced ideas, their physiological understanding of snakes and animals led them to believe, rightfully so, that the snake would gestate for 3 years, similar to other animals. Now the Gemara goes through, birds take 21 days, and other animals is 5 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year. But there are some animals that are 3 years, and the snake was also 3 years. That was based on their scientific knowledge of how the world worked. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani responds, I know that's how the world would indicate. That's how material science, natural science would indicate how long it should be. But truth be told, there's another angle over here. There's more going on. The snake may have been created that way originally, but then things changed. God intervened. And there was the drama of the story of the sin. And God later punished the snake and changed its nature. None of this is visible to the naked eye or to the human mind that's studying natural sciences. And therefore, we know something that they don't know. So he says, we're wiser than them. So the emperor said, you are really wiser than them? Then go defeat them in debate and bring them to me. I want them to come to me as well. Rabbi Yeshua said to him, how many of these Athens scholars are there? The emperor answered, 60 men. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Hanani said, construct a ship for me that has 60 rooms, Each room should have 60 mattresses. I don't know why he needed 60 rooms to contain all of them. Why he wanted the ship, we'll see soon. So the emperor constructed the ship for him, and Rabbi Shua set out on the ship for Athens. So he's going to take up the offer, debate with them, and if he defeats them, his job is to bring them back to Rome. And this is part of what he's trying to display, that there are many wise people out there, but we, based on our Torah and tradition, have the greater wisdom over them all. An amazing story. When he arrived in Athens, he gets off the ship. Where's he going to go, right? Where are these sages? Where do I go? He didn't have his GPS. Couldn't search it on Google. So he enters the butcher shop, and he finds a certain man, the butcher, flaying an animal. So Rabbi Shua said to him, "Is your head for sale?" The butcher, assuming he's talking about the animal head, says, "Sure." Rabbi Shua said to him, "How much?" And he said, "For half a dinar." The dinar was the gold coin of the time. So Rabbi Shua gives him the money, the half a dinar. After Rabbi Shua paid the butcher, he said to him, "No, give me your head." Did I say that I wanted the head of the animal? I'm not referring to the head of the animal. I asked for your head, and I paid for it. And now you owe me your head, which means your life is mine. And I have every right, somehow because I've purchased that right, to take your head. If you wish for me to let you go, I'm willing to do that, but on a condition. And the condition is, go and show me the entrance to the school of the sages of Athens. Rabbi Yeshua understood that he knew that where the sages of Athens are is a bit of a secretive location. He spoke about it. He had to find a way. Again, this whole trip is about using Jewish wisdom and Jewish wit to outmaneuver them. So he's already started to say, I'm going to find you even though you're in this discreet location. And he does this whole trick with the head of the butcher to convince him to take him to the scholars of Athens. So the butcher tells him, I can't. I'm afraid. Because they kill anybody who shows the location to another. It's secretive. I can't tell you. Rabbi Shua says to him, I have a plan. Listen carefully. Carry a bundle of reeds, and I'll be walking behind you. And as you arrive by the location, you will pretend to stand up and put down the bundle of reeds as if you're resting and try to reshuffle that bundle. That'll be the sign for me to stop here and get off. And then you can continue on your way. The butcher did this, and Rabbi Shua successfully found the entrance. Now, this is all the introduction to the debate, but it's so fascinating because so much of the detail here is so strange, and especially when we're going to get to the actual debate, the questions, the subject material is also so strange and so fantasy and sometimes absurd that the commentaries, they all point out that every line over here is to be understood and interpreted as some kind of allegory. There's a message, there's a deeper interpretation over here. Because of the absurdity, it's cloaking within it some very deep wisdom. So already in this very opening to the story of meeting the butcher and playing around with the butcher's head and having him show him the way by carrying the bundles, the Maharal explains this already is setting the stage over here. What's happening over here? Remember the debate. It's Judaism versus Greek philosophy. Now, the Greeks believed in the ultimate being the human. Now, the human can be very advanced. The human is not just, right? The human can exist really on two levels. The human could be the base, primitive human, our base urges, our sensual urges, food and desires, and all the other kinds of physical attractions and distractions that we have. And there most people would commonly agree that those are very bestial, animalistic traits. That's the human, where he's not very different from an animal, behaving instinctually, impulsively, not being able to control the desires of the heart, giving into all kinds of sensual pleasure. Many humans do that. We all have challenges with that. But those are, on that level, the human and the beast, the human and the animal are not very different. So those are very animalistic. Then we say there's another part of the human, which is the more elevated parts of the human. Let's call it the human mind, where the mind is able to transcend those animalistic, bestial impulses of the human being And the mind is like a place of purity. And the mind is a place of detachment. The mind is a place of abstraction. The mind is able to think cogently and rationalize and philosophize and explore deeply into all of that which goes on in our world. And the mind, therefore, is a very deep, profound place that's free from the trappings of animalistic desires, and the mind allows oneself to elevate and to transcend. That is true. But they were convinced that this mind is what allows them to transcend their animalistic desires altogether and to be the uber ultimate human and attach itself to the ultimate truth. Judaism teaches that whilst the mind is an incredibly powerful, important organ, and the mind helps us transcend those animalistic characteristics of human beings, but it's still just a human mind. And it comes with all the limitations of a human mind. And even the human mind, it can be corrupted, and it can be swayed. And even if you think that you're thinking purely objectively and rationally, completely separated from being partial and separated from swaying towards where the heart wants to pull you, you may think that way, but that's not always the case. And the mind is also just a product of human creation. And the mind can ultimately only achieve that which is in the limits of the human being. And to connect with pure truth and to connect with what is truly real, we need to use other organs of the body other than the mind. We use the organ of the soul. And the soul that transcends the mind and transcends the heart and transcends the physical body. The soul is the peace of God within us, which is the tool of faith and the tool of suppression of our humanity and our openness and vulnerability to attach ourselves to that which is truly higher and beyond ourselves. It's through those faculties and organs and experiences and moments that we can truly connect with the divine, with that which is true. The Greeks believed the soul was wisdom. The mind was the soul. And by the way, even in Jewish sources, we have where the soul is referred to as wisdom. But most Kabbalists, most Kabbalists talk about the soul being far greater than the mind and far greater than wisdom. Because it's that part of us that transcends any facet, any aspect of our humanity as elevated as it is. That is another point of tension of it. So if I think about this, Rabbi Shlomo is coming to the butcher. The butcher deals with animals. And he's turning to Greek. And he's telling them, ultimately, your way of life doesn't allow the human to be the real human. The human to really transcend and connect with that which is above it and become connected with truth and something real. You're always trapped by your animalistic side and characteristics and desires and impulses. That's the butcher. So he says, let me get your head. You think maybe your head can transcend. So the head can transcend, it's true. So we've already started to find the place where, thank you, Moshe. We've already started to find the place where a person can elevate themselves beyond their animalistic side. So therefore, he asks the person, I want you to take me to the skulls of Athens. Now this butcher, who's one of the simple folk, right? One of the things you find in the Greek culture and society was this class division of hierarchy among them. Because if truth can be found and explored only through the mind, so you have to be a very clever, wise, transcendent person to reach there. Many people were not like that. Many people are more simple. So they were the peasants of society. And they didn't have the powers of the mind to philosophize and rationalize and reach the heights of human achievement in that regard. So they lived in the lower class of society. They were the animals of society. That's how it was among them. So the butcher says, I can't make it there. I can never get there. I can't show you where it is because I can never attain those scholarly, cerebral pursuits of the Greeks, of the scholars. Yeshua ben Hanania said, don't worry, you can. Every person is capable of escaping their animalistic selves and elevating above that, because even from a very human perspective, forget about the Jewish philosophy for a moment, forget about God for a moment, but even just being a human, God gave you a mind and a brain to be able to live through in a more rational, cerebral way. You can achieve that. And he said, I'll prove it to you. How will I prove it to you? It's not out of human reach. And he proved it to him with this instruction of taking the bundle of straw, taking it, and then when you see the location, to give a sign to drop it. He told them, even as you get there, even those people sitting there, they think that they are completely separate from you, and they're more elevated and of a higher achievement and higher power because of their access to their intellect. It's not really the case. There's always a limitation. It's still human mind. And therefore, eventually, no matter how much you take the bundle there, you've got to drop it. It stops there. It doesn't go any further. It's always caught by the trappings of the human condition. So this is already, in a metaphoric way, in an allegory, how Rabbi Yeshua is introducing himself to Greek culture and eventually to the Greek scholars. Okay? So let's get back to the story. Side 2. Rabbi Yeshua found guards stationed on the inside and guards stationed on the outside to ensure that no one could enter or exit. So this is a very heavily protected and secure place where the 60 elders of Athens, they sit. And they sit there. No one's allowed to come in without the guard's permission. No one's allowed to go out without the guard's permission. They sit there and it's a think tank. They philosophize, they create poetry, they create drama, they create all kinds of intellectual pursuits and philosophies which the Greeks spoke about. You know, there's the famous allegory of the cave. I don't know if it came from Plato or from Socrates, but again, one of those Greek philosophers. So it's this idea that we were talking about. The allegory of the cave says like this. You may have heard of it. They say life is like, what's the allegory? Of people who are sitting in a dark cave. And they're chained, they cannot move, and they cannot move their heads, and they're facing the dark wall. They're living in darkness. Behind them, in that cave, there's a very large fire burning, producing some light. And in front of the fire, there's this pathway where people or things cross by. And so the people who are stuck looking at that wall of the cave, it's a dark space, but it's illuminated by the flames, and these things that are passing by creating shadows on the wall. And so when you are born and raised in that kind of allegory, you think all of reality are those shadows. That's all you know about. That's all you ever see. One day, one of those people is released from his shackles and he's taken outside of the cave. And when he first comes out of the cave, he's blinded by the light, by the sunlight, thinking he's come to a bad place. He's been blinded. But then as he begins to adjust, he sees, ooh, there's a real world out here. And everything is not just the shadow. Everything before I was seeing was just the shadow. That's real. But now this is really real, what I'm seeing now. He's become enlightened. So much so that one day he says, I want to go back into the cave to tell the other people about it. When he comes back into the cave, first of all, he becomes blinded again because now it's so dark. Now I can't see anything. So the people in the cave think, oh, this person was taken to hell. Now he's coming back. Look how he's been blinded. It must have done some damage and harm to him. And he wants to convince them to come outside because there it's real. They say, no, 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 no. And they're ready to kill him. You've gone to the dark side. We're on the side of light. And that's where the philosophers came in and they said, most of the people are seeing shadows their whole life. It's time to open your eyes and expand your mind and realize the true thing. But again, as Judaism will tell us, as Rabbi Yeshua teaches us, that's all within the domain of the human experience. So now we're trying to get into this enclave, and there's guards inside and outside, and there's sand spread on the ground in the entranceway so that they can detect if anyone entered or left. If you see footprints, and there was no permission for those footprints to come in and out, you're going to be killed. If they saw footprints that were entering, that would kill the outer guards, allowing people to enter. If they saw footsteps that were exiting, they would kill the inner guards, allowing people to leave. How was Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah going to get inside this secretive gathering of the elders of Athens? So this is what he did. The next paragraph is a strange one. And the truth is, all the commentaries are trying to figure out what exactly happened over here, and there are different versions in the Talmud itself. I'm not going to get carried away with it, but just let's read it through. Rabbi Yeshua reversed his sandal, so he was facing away from the entrance. He wore his shoe backwards, walked on the sand, thereby creating the appearance of someone who had left the building. When the authorities saw the footsteps, they killed the inner guards. Rabbi Yeshua then returned, reversed his sandal, once again walked backwards with a reversed sandal, made footsteps in the sand indicating that someone had entered the building. Then they killed all the guards, also the outer guards, and Rabbi Yeshua succeeded in entering the building. What exactly he did, and why do you have to flip the sandal and then turn around if you could have just walked out backward? And how did it happen? Doesn't matter. He did something to get in because, again, he's out. maneuvering them. He's outwitting them. He's using his Yiddish cup to tell them that we are wiser than you. And so far, he has succeeded all the way until getting into this secretive space. Rabbi Shua found the younger sages sitting in the upper, more prominent section. In those cultures, the younger people sat in the upper section. They said, we're the greater ones. Sounds familiar in our society, right? And the elder ones in the lower section. We'll put the older people, they're already withered and they're all worn out and no longer sharp like we are. They'll sit on the bottom. Now, he said to himself, again, he has to think this through. I must first greet the younger sages as they're sitting in the upper section prior to the elder sages. But if I greet these younger sages first, the older sages will kill me as they maintain we are better because we are older and we are children. So who's he going to greet first? Whoever he greets first, if it's the older ones, the younger ones will say, well, we're going to kill you because we're sitting at the top. If it's the younger ones, the older ones will say, well, we feel very ashamed. He's going to get killed either way. So Rabbi Yeshua, being a very wise man, he says, greetings to you, but did not directly address either group. So he just gave a general hello to everybody, and everyone can assume he's talking to them. They said to him, what are you doing here? He said to them, I am a sage of the Jews, and I desire to learn wisdom from you. They said to him, all right, so then we'll ask you questions and see if you're worthy of this privilege. Rabbi Yeshua said to them, very well. And here are the terms. If you win, you may do to me anything you wish. But if I defeat you, then you come to my ship and you eat with me. Remember, he has to get them on the ship to come back to Rome. They're never going to want to do that. So if he says, come back to Rome with me, they're not going to agree, but to come to my ship and eat. And then in the meantime, the ship will just undock itself. Well, that's the plan. And they were very intrigued by his confidence because he said, if you win, you can do whatever you want with me, which is even to kill me. And if I win, all I want is a dinner from you. So he's got them thinking. He's got them intrigued. And now, after that whole introduction, he's finally made it. Here he is, the moment of truth. Jewish sage, 1 against 60 sages of Athens. Here begins the debates. There's, like I told you, there's probably 10, 11, or 12 or more of these questions in the Talmud. We're not going to learn them all, but I prepared 3 to learn tonight if we get the time. All right. Listen carefully, because when we read them at face value, we're not going to understand the word. And that's why we have to get into the deeper interpretations of these questions. The sages of Athens asked, when salt is spoiling, what does one salt it? With what does one salt it to preserve it? Right? Salt is the preservative, the ultimate preservative. If the salt itself is spoiling, how are you going to preserve the salt? That's their question. Yeshua answers them simple, with the placenta of a mule. Those amniotic fluids in the sack of a mule, that's what can preserve the salt when the salt is spoiling. They said to him, but is there a placenta of a mule? Don't we know that a mule is sterile? A mule is an animal, it's a hybrid between a female horse and a male donkey. And the product is a mule, and a mule can't have children. It's sterile. So there's no placenta. Yeshua said to them, and does salt spoil? You asked me a silly question, I gave you a silly answer. That's the end of that question. What are they saying? Let's read further. They said, well, this is the great wisdom of the Jews versus the Greeks. They said to him, second question, build us a house in the air of the world. Rabbi Yeshua uttered the name of God and hovered between the sky and the earth, hanging there. And he called out to them and he says, bring me the bricks and the mortar and I'll build you a house here. Meaning, you can't bring me bricks and mortar. So I'm here, I'm ready to build a house, but you're the guys that are the problem. Because of you, we can't build this house between heaven and earth in the air. Again, he won the debate. Third question. They asked him, where is the center of the world? Rabbi Shua raised his finger and he said, here. They said to him, and who says you're correct? He said, well, try me out. Prove me wrong. Bring ropes and measure. And it goes on and on. It gets even more interesting and cryptic and ridiculous. It seems like it's ridiculous and absurd, but it's not. These are truly great scholars having a debate. So what we need to figure out is what is going on over here? What are they talking about? Let's do this step by step, because we're going to discover the depths of the philosophies of Jews versus Greek, Jerusalem versus Athens being expressed in these absurd allegory and debate between. Let's start with the first one. If salt is spoiling, then what is used to preserve salt? What were they asking? They were asking like this. What is salt? Salt is a metaphor. In Jewish tradition, salt is a metaphor for two things. I'll give you two different explanations of it. The first is that salt is a metaphor. Very often we have the concept called a brit milah, which means a covenant of salt. And the brit, the covenant between God and the Jewish people, is referred to in the Torah as brit milah, the covenant of salt. Why the covenant of salt? Because salt cannot spoil. And so what's the idea of a brit, of a covenant? When you make a covenant with somebody, with a friend, with a spouse, what are you essentially saying? If you were saying, let's be friends for as long as we can, and if we have a fallout, we have a fallout, okay, you can say that. But when you say, let's be friends or in a relationship forever, and no matter what will happen, even if something comes our way that truly threatens and truly wants to undermine our relationship, we're still going to hang in there for each other. For that, you need a covenant. So in a sense, marriage is like a covenant. Now, not that marriage is never unbreakable. It is even according to the Torah. When we get married, we try to make that covenant. But certainly the relationship and the marriage between God and the Jewish people was a brit melech, a covenant of salt. And God was saying that this will never be stained and never be ruined, no matter what happens between us during this time. So the Greeks said, here you have this covenant of salt with God, and God has given you the land of Israel, and he's promised you to be the chosen nation, and he took you out of Egypt, and he gave you the Torah, and he brought you into Israel, and you've spent glorious times in Israel with Jewish sovereignty, with your temple, with your God. However, it's all over. Look at you. Your temple has been destroyed. Most of your people have been either exiled or killed. And you're all a nation living in exile. Without your temple, without your Jewish sovereignty, what happened to your Brit Melech covenant of salt? It's over. The salt is becoming spoiled. And with what can you preserve the salt? With nothing. If salt is becoming spoiled and salt is the greatest preservative, there is nothing that can preserve salt. So the Greeks told the Jewish people, maybe once upon a time you were the stars of the show. And maybe you had the authority or the position or the privilege to say that you are the wise men of the universe and you are in charge and empowered to be the influences of the world. But your time is over. And we've taken over. Look at us. We're living a more glorious, beautiful, happier life than you guys. That's a big challenge. Rabbi Shua Bechanani responds, you're making a big mistake. He says, the proof that you're making a mistake is the placenta of the mule. What does that mean? What's the answer? The mule is sterile. The mule cannot father or mother any offspring. The mule may be a very wonderful animal, and it is, by the way, because they say the mule has the advantages both of the horse and of the donkey. It has strength, but it also has the longevity and the endurance. It's not subject to many diseases. It's easier to deal with. It has all the pros of a horse and the pros of a donkey. It's not as obstinate as a donkey, and it's not as fragile as a horse. So the mule is great. It's beautiful, but it can't father any children. Sterile. Rabbi Shua Bechanani told them, you're making a big mistake. Maybe you guys are beautiful. Maybe you guys are in a position of power right now and freedom, and maybe we're not. However, You're mules, and we're not. Because we have an ancestry, and we go all the way back to the beginning of time. And we trace our roots, not just our physiological roots, not just our ancestral roots, our spiritual roots, our religious roots, the roots of our national roots. We trace them all the way back to Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, and the 12 children, the 12 tribes, all the way through to Moses, and then Moses and the Jewish people. We go all the way back to them, not just in an ancestral way, that too, but more than that, in the way that we have a tradition that comes all the way from them. We have an unbroken chain all the way till today. And if we have an unbroken chain that began all the way then, and we're still here, in the very same spirit, with the very same certainty, this chain will continue to remain unbroken with our children as well. And this that God told us, that is going to choose us and give us the Torah and take us to our promised land of Israel, that is eternal. And our relationship with God is eternal. And our tasks that we've been given by God to be his ambassadors to the world is also eternal. Nowhere in that contract did it say it's always going to be rosy. Nowhere did it say that it's always going to be a time of privilege and good fortune. And there were going to be times of ups and downs like in every relationship. And we're going to be in love, and we're going to be sitting in Israel, and then we're going to have a bit of a fallout, and we're going to let the leave, be exiled, and then we came back. Right? When Abraham first went to Israel, his very first mission, he comes there, and it's a famine. He has to leave Israel. He thinks God has neglected him. He goes down to Egypt. And that's been our story ever since. We came out of Egypt, we went into Israel. We built a temple with King David for 400 years. And then he got destroyed by the Babylonians. And we were exiled, but we came back. That's our story. It's true. It's a complicated story. It's not such a rosy story, but it's a guaranteed story. It's not the story of a mule. It's not the story of somebody. You guys are mules. Where do you guys come from? You just appeared out of nowhere. You're a self-made species. You're a beautiful species, but you don't trace national, spiritual, historic, religious roots to the beginning of time. You appeared, and you're here, and at some point you'll no longer be here. You're a mule. We have the longevity, we have the endurance, we have the gift, we have the certainty of having always been here, and we will always be here. There's a very famous story with David Ben-Gurion. After the state of Israel was established, and so, or right before, so there was the famous Peel Commission led by Lord Peel of the British Commonwealth, trying to figure out a resolution between the Jews and the Palestinians and the Arabs for the state of Israel. And so Ben-Gurion was invited to the commission to present his case for who is Israel and who are the Jews and what do you need a land for? And one of the questions posed to him was, what kind of nation are you, right? Many other nations, we understand why they're a nation. They have a common language. They come from a common place. And that's how the French are, and the Italians are, and the Romans are, and the Arabs are, and et cetera, et cetera. But you Jews, I mean, you come from all different lands. You all speak different languages. You speak Russian and Polish and Yiddish and Hebrew and wherever you come from. And you've spent 2,000 years in all different lands. What kind of shared bond do you have that you're actually one nation? And Ben-Gurion gave the most unbelievable, timeless response to that question. He said, I want to ask you a question. A couple hundred years ago, the very famous Mayflower ship docked in the American port. And that was a great moment for Britain and for Americans, where finally these people left the British monarch and arrived at the shores of America. So anyone in the American country and the British should celebrate this moment, right? Now let me ask you a question. Does anybody here know the day of the week that ship set dock? Does anybody know the date of the month that it was? Does anybody know any names of people on that ship? Does anybody know what food they ate on the ship? Does anybody know who was the captain, the master, who led the ship? None of you know anything about it. But that is a defining moment in your history. We have a defining moment in our history long before the Mayflower. It was more than 3,000 years ago when the Jews left Egypt. And every single Jewish person, even a small child, knows the exact day of the week that it happened and the date of the month that it happened. It was Passover, the 15th of Nisan. We know that Moses was there to lead. We know what the people ate. They ate matzah. We know everything about their journey. And that is a tradition that we have in our collective history that every single Jewish person shares, no matter if it's a Jew in Italy or in France or somewhere in Europe or in America or down south in Australia or Africa somewhere. And you're asking me what kind of nation we are? That's the story of the Jewish people. We are not mules because we're not self-made. We're made by God, began with a tradition at Revelation at Sinai, with an ancestral beginning that began with the God-selected prophets of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that was passed down, not just genetically, but passed down spiritually as well. And we are a gift of that, and we continue to pass that on. And so he tells them, salt can never become rancid. Salt can never become rotten. We are salt. Your mule, it doesn't have a placenta. There's no history. There's no future. But for salt, it'll last forever. And our covenant with God is truly a covenant of salt. The very famous philanthropist and Jewish activist, Mr. George Rohr, who supports so many Jewish organizations, he, many years ago, began a youth minyan in his synagogue in New York. And it was basically a youth minyan, but also a minyan for unaffiliated Jewish people. So it was a very established synagogue, and many people who are connected with Shabbat and Jewish life, would go there. But what about those who had no connection and very little education? So he began a beginner's minyan for those to be introduced into the world of Judaism and prayer and Torah study. And it started, and it really kicked off quickly, and a lot of people who were never seen in the synagogues were joining it. And at some point, he wanted to go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask for a blessing for what he was doing. And so he tells the Rebbe, he began this minyan, a beginner's minyan, for Jews who have no background. And thank God it's going really well, and I want your blessings that it should continue to be more successful. So the Rebbe said, huh? So he thought maybe the Rebbe didn't hear him. He repeated again, we've begun the beginner's minyan for Jews who have no background. Again, the Rebbe said, huh? And it happened a third time also. And he realized something is amiss. The Rebbe heard him. He was speaking clearly. And then the Rebbe told him, there is no such thing as a Jew who has no background. Because every Jew is a child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. What do you mean a Jew without background? We're salt. We have the covenant of salt. We began at the beginning of time, and we're an unbroken chain ever since. We're not the story of the mule. That is the response of Yeshua ben Hananiah to the sages of Athens. That's one interpretation. I want to share with you a second interpretation. Melech, salt, is also a metaphor for Torah. Just like salt contributes so much, it gives a spice, it gives flavor, it gives taste in life. So to the Torah is the spices. The Torah is what makes life into something purposeful and meaningful and gives us a reason to live. The sages were asking, what happens if the salt becomes spoiled? The Athens sages turned to Rabbi Shua ben Hananiah and they said, your Torah used to be amazing. When it was given, I'm sure it was profound and advanced for its time, and people bought into it and you accepted it. Time has gone on. The world has progressed, the world has changed. Torah is not so in fashion anymore. It's time to give it a bit of a tune-up. It's time to refresh it with something new. Look at this world we live in nowadays. Well, look at what we've discovered. We've discovered the arts, culture, the philosophy, drama, the Olympics, the sports, great foods, cuisine. We have created so much beauty in this world. All of your Torah and your mitzvah is becoming a little outdated, right? Why should a Jew go to synagogue on Shabbat if they can go to the Greek gymnasiums? And why should they sit in the sukkah outside if they can join some of our clubs and philosophize and enjoy dance and drama with us? And why should they be studying Torah texts, the ancient ones they've cited 1,000,000 times, if they can read some of our poetry and our literature and our philosophy? This was the story of Hanukkah, as I mentioned earlier. This was the movement of the Greeks Hellenizing the Jewish people. And this was suggesting it's time to change the Torah a little bit. It's time to become updated. Oh, look, yeah, thank you. It's time to update it with the new, modern, and progressive movements and technologies that we've created in our world. Again, Rabbi Shulchan tells them, you're wrong. You're the mule. What's the mule? The mule is the hybrid between the donkey and the horse. And it's true, the offspring, the mule is an unbelievable animal, right? And it's got a lot of value to it because it has strength of the donkey and the skills of the horse. It's a clever animal and it lives a very long time. But it cannot give birth to anything. It is the last generation of its kind. It stops right there. Rabbi Shulchan said, you're right. If we were to make a hybrid of our ancient tradition together with your modern philosophies, beliefs, and inventions, and we would put together the different cultures together, and the Jew could be a Jew, could also be a Greek, and he could do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and he could enjoy Shabbat, but then enjoy your pagan worship. You know that the Greeks outlawed circumcision. That was one of their big things during times of Hanukkah. Why? Because they said the human body is gorgeous as it is, and we have to try to beautify it even more with toning it up with good diet and good food and good muscle and exercise, and let's make the human into the strongest it can be and the fastest it can be. Circumcising it will impair the body. So they came from a whole different viewpoint. Their viewpoint was, we control what is beauty. Whereas the Jews came from a viewpoint, God tells us what is beauty. God tells us what is important, what is valuable. We don't decide. God is at the center of our world. Not we're the center of our world. As Rabbi Shulchan said, if you put together the two cultures and you do a bit of this and a bit of that, and I'm a little bit religious, but I'm also a little bit, and I borrow something nice from Judaism, but I borrow something nice from a secular world, and I want to dance at all parties, and Yiddish, this expression, tanzen of alle chasanis, and I'll be good with everybody. I don't have to be married to anything, any path in life. I can pick and choose, right? That's how the modern people think today. Shulchan says, you know what you're going to create? You're going to create something gorgeous, beautiful, attractive. Everyone's going to want to be a part of it. It'll be a fad. Except that's where it's going to end. It's not going to last much longer. It doesn't have a backbone. It doesn't have a fuel to fuel this for future generations. How does it get passed on to the children and the grandchildren? What is the message? What's the ideology? What's the truth behind it? Who's going to carry it on? Who's going to accept it in later generations? Fads and trends, they come and they go. And why? Because tomorrow there'll be a new trend and a new fad and a trend to take this one's place, and then there'll be another one. The power and the strength and the value of Judaism was never that it was a fad. It was never something glitzy and gorgeous. That's not how it prized itself. It prized itself in just being true and being real. And if it's real, it doesn't have to shine. It doesn't have to become so attractive in that kind of forceful way. It just is the real thing, and the real thing always lasts forever. We're not a mule. You are. And Shabbat 3,000 years ago and Shabbat today is given the same meaning and beauty to Jewish life always. And charity and Torah study and prayer and eating kosher and all around mitzvot, which fuel our societies and our individual responsibilities. It's what's given a purpose and meaning and truth to our ancestors 3,000 years ago and to us today. It's an unbelievable idea because not everything that's real and true shines like all the fads and the trends of the time. If people would think about their love and their relationship with each other, right? Sometimes you want it to look fancy, to look sparkly, so we can post those pictures online. It's nice. It's a mule. That doesn't fuel anything. It doesn't create results. What's going to create results is what you see behind the scenes, the hard work of something real, not so glitzy, not something that can become a trend, because it's something that's real and requires hard work. That was the answer, Rabbi Shulchan. Let's see if we have time for a couple more. Let's continue. He says, we didn't have time for both, so I'm just trying to think which one to teach right now. All right, we'll do the last one. The second one is a little deep. we'll maybe save it for another week. The last one. They asked him, where's the center of the world? He said, right here. So they said, how do you know? So he said, let's measure. He was making fun of them, and he was also teaching them something very, very powerful. He was making fun of them when he said, let's measure. Because he was saying, you guys feel and believe that you, through your human mind and prowess, have figured everything out or can figure everything. And you believe that with your scientific tools and philosophical constructs, you can make sense of everything. That's the case. Bring your ropes, bring your measuring sticks, bring all of your intellectual tools and measure the universe. And at least back then, measuring the universe was, of course, impossible. And what he was telling them is, there are things that your mind and your skills and your talents cannot achieve, can never figure out. You know why? Because there are things way out of your league. There are things that are otherworldly. That's God. And that's the God entity, the spiritual entity behind everything. And you ask me where's the center of the universe? The answer is very simple. What is the universe? The universe is not just a ball, a physical ball of earth, lava, and well springs and all the other things that the naked eye will see. The earth is a vision. The earth is a plan. The earth is a project of God, that He creates earth, and all those physical constructs are the tools or the platform upon which this plan will unfold. And the plan is to have humanity who will connect with God, listen to the word of God, fulfill the mission, the God-given mission for them in this world, to create this world into a holier place and a better place and a kinder place and a happier place and a more peaceful and just world. That's what earth is. And so you're asking where's the center of the universe? Here is the center of the universe. You know how I know? Because God has told me that I am the center of the universe for me. And you should be saying that you are the center of the universe for you. Because what does the center of the universe mean? We know that Jerusalem and the Temple Mount were the center of the universe. Why? Nowhere in the Torah does it say the word Jerusalem. It's not in the whole Torah, a little bit in the prophets, but not in the whole Torah. God refers to that location as Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that God chooses. Wherever God chooses, that's the center. Wherever God has tasked with a mission to do that which is needed from you, that's the center of the world, center of your world. That's where God has placed you, and your God is with you to do what you're supposed to be doing. So Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, of course, are the center of the world. Even when the temple is destroyed, there's still a certain holiness there. But at the same time, on my individual responsibility, wherever I am, even if I'm not in the holy space of Jerusalem, in the whole land of Israel, I'm the center of the world. I'm exactly what God wants, where God wants me to be, in the right person. Listen to this. I'm always the right person in the right place at the right time. Always. That's an important lesson. How often have we said in life, I was the right person in the right place, but at the wrong time, or at the right time, but in the wrong place. I missed opportunities. I failed opportunities. Our whole life is about not getting it right, not being in the right place at the right time, or the right person. God tells us that's not a Jewish belief. That's a Greek belief. That's how you think you're controlling everything, and you knew you could have been somewhere else better or more successful at a different time. But the God belief is that you're always the right person in the right place at the right time. And if you will discover that, then you'll recognize that for your place in this world, you are the center of the universe. That's what we believe. The great Kotzker Rebbe was once asked, where is God? And he answered, God is wherever you let him in. So you don't have to go to the mountaintops to find God, and you don't have to go to the depths of human achievement and wisdom to find God. If you believe like that, then you create this class society, because those that can't get there will never find God. So therefore you have the peasants at the bottom and the scholars at the top. And Judaism never believed that way. Judaism said, whoever you are, whatever your abilities are, whether you have the cerebral intellectual abilities or you have other talents, It doesn't matter. If you're being what God wants you to be, and you're discovering at every moment of your life that it's the right place and the right time to be who you need to be, and you're maximizing the opportunities of every and any experience, be they good, of good fortune, of not such good fortune, it's irrelevant. It's what God is handing to you. Then you are the center of the universe. There's no one person that is more the center of the universe than another person. There's no one person that could be more connected to God to another person. We don't believe in that because we believe in a God as the great equalizer who creates us all the same, who brings us all together, and collectively we're on the same team, achieving that which God asked us to. And these are some of the ways that Rabbi Shua ben Hanania is responding to the Athens scholars and putting them in their place and describing and portraying a path of philosophy, a spiritual belief that it completely rejects the beliefs of the Greeks, and it puts forth the Jewish ideology, the Jewish philosophy, which was the most original one, the most real one, and which creates for a most special, beneficial, purposeful, happier life. We're going to pause for now. There's so much more of these. Maybe in future weeks we're going to learn. I hope this has been very interesting to you. It is fascinating. Thank you, Benny. Mazal. Yes, there should be a lot of mazal for us all. God should bless you all. See you next week, same time, same place. And stay safe. Have a good night. God bless you.